Okay. All right, good evening. Welcome to the Easthampton City Council Ordinance Committee meeting, November 2nd, 6:30 p.m. This meeting is being held remotely. Governor Charlie Baker's open meeting law adjustments require that we meet remotely. And so tonight we will be meeting, oh, I got more people coming in, by Zoom. So let me just, we don't have any minutes. So let's see if anybody is here for public speak time. So if you have anything that you would like to talk about that's not on the agenda, I will be giving some time tonight for people to be able to speak to what we have on our agenda and the discussion we have. I am going to ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes, and that you try not to cover territory that has already been covered as it relates to this, the items on our agenda. So if you're here to say the same thing you said last time, I think that we got that. Not that you can't say that, but just for time's sake, I will preface this with I am feeling a little Zoom burn, as I've been on Zoom since 8 o'clock this morning. So forgive me if I am a little terse if people are reviewing stuff that has already been covered. So I'm just going to put that disclaimer out there. So today we do have, let me put this. I asked for public speak time. Does anybody have anything they would like to say that's not related to an item on our agenda? Okay, seeing none, I think we can jump right into this. So right now what we have, and be aware, we do have another, we do have a new agenda item that I would like to spend a little time on, but since we have people here that are interested in this particular topic, I think the way I'd like to format it tonight is I would like to give people a chance to speak about the cannabis amendment to allow new construction in highway business. And then I would like to deliberate with my committee and possibly talk about some ideas that I had. And then what I'll do is I'll open it up one more time for people to be able to discuss any of the things that we put out on the table, then close it. And just to be aware, we also have a public hearing scheduled for Wednesday. And I'm thinking, just because of the time, if we do choose to put forward any amendments, we would need probably one more meeting to have the city attorney review those. So just for full disclosure. So would anybody like to speak to this particular agenda item before the committee starts to discuss the finer points of this? And just raise your hand. And okay, it looks like we have Ellen Freyman. So good afternoon, good evening. If you could just say your name and your address for the record.
Sure. I'm Ellen Freyman. I'm with Schwartz and Fenton in Springfield and representing Apical Inc. And I apologize if some of these questions or comments have already been brought up. This is my first time being involved with this matter. So Apical does have, they're leasing property that already has a building. So I'm just trying to understand what was the intent. So does this, so if they were to add on, they could add on up to 25,000 square feet, or is this the total? So if it's a 15,000 square foot building, they could add on 10,000 square feet. And also, is this the footprint, or because in the highway business district, it could be a 3-story building. So is it the footprint that's measured and they still could build a 3 stories? So I just want to understand what's happening with what was the intent. And then also the 5 acre requirement. If you don't have 5 acres, what are you allowed to do?
Okay, so I can speak to that a little bit, and I'll let our city planner speak to that as well. So this is something that we had discussed last time about adding on, and I think that the way we left it was that we were, at least, I'll try to characterize this the way I remember it, is that we had discussed, 25,000 being a cap. So that's the way that we left it when we were discussing it. I revisited that when I was deliberating on my own as far as coming up with ideas. And so one of the things that I would present as we move forward tonight is that as an incentive for people to reuse old buildings, to allow them an additional 25,000 square feet of new growing space that would not be bound by the 5-acre requirement and would not be, yeah. So that was one of the things as I try to, unfortunately what happened here is that we, received this request to look at the zoning. And then after that happened, a project came in across the street midstream of, a couple months into this deliberation. And so that puts us in the position of, passing legislation that's either going to help one business or hurt another. And so trying to find a way to balance that, I think that was one of the reasons why I felt that offering that as an incentive, and that would be something that we would do in the form of an amendment basically to the planning board's language. But Jeff, I'll let you jump in there and go ahead. And
I think that's good. I think the intent was really to regulate the footprint of the building. So, the 20, at least for the purpose of the discussion, the initial language, the 25,000 square feet would be a footprint, and it doesn't calculate the growth, like the growth going up. So I think that's kind of one thing that's important, is that the discussion of footprint. The 5 acres was another thing that we were, when we tried to make some language changes to allow accommodations for existing buildings, we were not trying to make those properties have the 5 acres. I mean, I think we looked at 102 Northampton Street and understood that it doesn't have 5 acres, and we were not trying to make that requirement apply. And then the only other thing, what I heard is Councilor Derby would like to have some other discussion about making this the existing building plus 25,000 square feet. And I think that would be the one thing that would be worth some additional discussion, just about what could happen if you apply this across the whole district. So that would be the only thing that I would, reserve my opinion. I think that, I think if the way that Councilor Derby described it would be an incentive, I would want to just run some numbers and have everyone make sure you understand that we have some larger buildings in the highway business that, it would, we'd want to look at that first. But the other two questions are, we were looking at only footprint, and we were not intending to require that 5 acre size. So those are the two things I could answer.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you. And I hope that you do consider the additional, the 25,000, because that would be certainly an incentive for this property.
And just to be clear, that's not something that we have discussed as a committee yet.
I understand.
So we kind of danced around the issue about what do we do about additions, but this was just something, as I was trying to find a balanced way to approach this, that I thought could be a potential fix. So, and I'm happy to discuss this with the committee and with Jeff. And okay, so is anybody else? Thank you. Anybody else like to speak to this as we move forward here? Jeff, I see your hand up. So just say your name and address for the record, please. And you have to unmute too. I think you have to do it. There you go.
Yeah. Jeff Cernak, and regarding the property at 102 Northampton Street. My first question was a process question. I didn't know about this meeting until somebody told me about it today, and I had been checking the website fairly regularly. I think the last time I checked was Thursday last week, and I didn't see it. And I saw on the agenda, which I'm holding here, that it was received by the Office of the City Clerk at 1:25 p.m. on October 30th, which I believe is Friday. And I thought that there's supposed to be a 48-hour notice for meetings excluding weekends.
So I can speak to that. That was an oversight by our city clerk, who's super overwhelmed at this point with the election stuff, and it just slipped her posting it. And so when I checked in and said, "Hey, have you posted this yet?" she basically just apologized and put it up right away. But it was, it was an unfortunate oversight. But I did announce it at our last city council meeting. but it didn't actually get posted until Friday.
Yeah, I wasn't at your last city council meeting, and doesn't that make that meeting and this meeting invalid today? Without
No.
the 48 hours?
No. No, I asked Barbara, the question I asked was, is this too late to post? Do we need to reschedule? And she said, nope. She put it up right away and she said it was fine. And I trust her judgment as being the clerk for the city for the last, 20 something years.
Okay. The second question that I had is, Apical has got their application for special permit in. My understanding is that one of the zoning ordinances that's still in place is the 200-foot buffer, property line to property line. If they get their special permit, doesn't it make this whole thing moot?
I think that's a question Jeff can answer probably better than I can.
I'm not sure that it automatically makes it moot per se. I mean, I think that under the current zoning, Apical has advanced quicker to this stage, so it's important for Apical. Apical would need to get the special permit, recorded at the, I guess the way it would probably have to run the appeal period and then be recorded at the Registry of Deeds. And then in essence, that does set up the 200-foot buffer, which you alluded to. But I think the other entities still would potentially have some options available, which is to, talk about an additional zoning change to remedy that problem. That's how these processes work, or they would choose to maybe not, proceed, but we don't have control over them continuing to pursue the property if they understand that the zoning wouldn't allow that without a change.
Looks like Councilor Zaret.
Oh, just a point of order that while there is another interested applicant who is an example of how this zoning might apply, that is not the reason that this zoning discussion is being undertaken. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
That's absolutely correct. Yep. So, I think that is one of the things that is in place now, and there has been discussion whether that makes sense for one of these planned business development operations, and in that zone, there potentially it could hold more than it's different than if you're in downtown business. So that's one of the things that we have discussed is, looking at either exempting projects in highway business from the 200-foot buffer, just to, make it a little bit easier for people to have a go at this. But yeah, I mean, I think I'll defer to Jeff on the actual process of that, since we're kind of looking at just the ordinance change.
Well, just to follow up on what Mr. Cernak asked, I mean, right now, the amendment is about cultivation facilities. So, and then you have a company across, Apical's applying for the special permit for retail. So you will be proceeding forward. Apical will have to get that special permit, and then it does leave a question. I agree with the nature of your question, that it creates a question for the folks across the street, whether they could also pursue retail, without a change to the zoning. It doesn't seem like they could, but I don't think it automatically makes the point moot. So that was just I don't know if I'm wordsmithing what you had said, but they could still potentially pursue cultivation in a new building, and that this amendment that we're talking about, addresses that.
Right. Well, I think
unless I'm missing something else, I don't know.
Doesn't the change to the amendment, though, require a retail if they're doing a cultivation highway business?
As worded, it does. Yeah. Yep. That was some of the language that we had.
But I think that if we're looking at properties that are 5 acres, which is what we're looking at, I don't know what kind of configuration there would or could be, and I think that the 200-foot buffer is specifically for retail establishments. So if they chose to have a different configuration, or chose a different spot, because there are other spots in highway business that could potentially catch this. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So I think, one of the things that I would like to do is I'd like to just take a quick look at some of the issues that have come up. And I don't see Danielle here tonight, and I don't know if she couldn't make it. And I do want to, I think that probably all the members of the committee received a letter from Brenda. And just for time's sake, I'm not going to necessarily read it for the record, but I will submit it to the record and say that, her general thought was that she doesn't agree with any cannabis cultivation in the highway business, or that, she is not in favor of this change specifically. So that being said, one of the things that I felt like it was important to us as a committee was to address just the kind of unique nature of this potential zoning change in relation to residential areas. And I think in order to, as I thought about this, I thought about how can we mitigate some, potential issues, because there's multiple areas within the zone that could bump up against residential zoning and residential properties. And while I'm not in favor of buffers, I am, in favor of hearing what residents express their concern and trying to find a way to mitigate the issues that they perceive could result from that. And so, one of the amendments that I was considering putting forward was including a 150-foot buffer from any new cannabis facility to the residential property lines. And so I just wanted to throw that out there and see what my colleagues thought and kind of bounce that around. So I'm happy to hear your thoughts on it, Owen, Tom. Yeah, Councilor Zaret.
I mean, I guess the first thing I'll say is I think it demonstrates some thoughtfulness around the concerns that have been brought forward by neighboring residents. I think that, at least, so from what I've heard, it sounds like people's biggest concerns are being potentially their residents being near to cultivation facilities, in so much that at least they feel that that application is more similar to an industrial application than a traditional retail application. And so I do kind of get that, especially when it comes to new construction, where right now, so far, what we've seen potentially in the city as a whole and potentially in the highway business district is reuse of existing buildings. And what we're talking about with new construction of cultivation will definitely present a lot differently than the way that this is currently applied. So I think it's a reasonable discussion to have. I mean, it's I know before there was a discussion about odor mitigation. I think we agreed that 150 feet or 1,500 feet, you might not mitigate odor, and we already have other things in place to do so. So, but I think it's a reasonable kind of nod to the fact that we do have residents that live next to this zone, and that there are potentially some unique considerations with this industry in general. So, I mean, I'd have to talk it out more, but I think it's at least, something to talk about.
Okay. Tom, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that as an idea. I do definitely think that when you're talking about something that, I mean, I have to give the folks who are concerned, I have to give them at least some credit for the fact that, like, yes, this would be a facility in which a thing is produced on a fairly large scale, right? So there's, it's agriculture, but it's also that, like, it is a little bit, industrial, in that you could potentially see deliveries coming and going. You could potentially see large, like, lights that are on a good deal of time. You could potentially see HVAC systems that might make a little bit of noise. So the idea that somebody might not want that right next to their bedroom window, not that that's what anyone's suggesting, but it's not a completely it's not an unrealistic expectation, I don't think, for a homeowner. I don't have an issue with the idea, especially when we're talking about very large parcels that frankly are probably not going to be used that intensively. Under the planned business development, we're talking about a lot of space that's just landscaping and grass, right? So I don't see this as onerous towards a potential business, and I see it as a nice enough thing that you can do for a nearby homeowner. So I don't have a problem with it.
Okay.
I don't know if it'll satisfy the resident, the abutters, but it certainly is, something. Sure.
Absolutely. Well, and it's funny, Tom, because I've been thinking really hard about this one, and all those things that you mentioned, like deliveries, lights on, HVAC systems. I was like, if there was a grocery store there, they could put that grocery store literally on they'd have to just go by the residential setback 30 feet. And it would have probably more of that, because it would probably early morning hours and, so I've thought about that, and I was like, well, that doesn't preclude something else from going in there that's going to be more onerous.
Yeah, no, sure. Noted.
Yeah. So I just, because that was one of the things that, was sticking in my craw, was that, there's a lot of uses that could go in there that might be, more, because if you think about it, there's not in the Grove facility, you're not going to have people high traffic, like if it was a TJ Maxx, so anyway, so I appreciate your feedback. And I think that probably the way that we do these amendments, we don't have to vote on them necessarily. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, it would make sense for us to have some agreement on them. Unless we all feel really strongly that it's something that we definitely want to include, then we can vote on it and have it as we report out from committee saying this is something we all agreed on. And I'm happy to do that if we can find that ground. And I think that it will be important for any amendments that we do want to bring into this to be able to get them vetted before, so like, 11th hour amendments are probably going to be a difficult thing because we want these vetted. So
yeah, this is a complicated issue, and I do feel pretty strongly that however tedious this is for us or stakeholders in this process, I would really have a strong preference towards bringing a final product to the council. We all feel like pretty good about, because I know that there's going to be a whole lot of these discussions are going to start all the way over and in the council, and I'd have a prepared answer for all the stuff that's going to come up.
Absolutely. And that's, we can't modify what the planning board gave us, but we can create our own amendments to that document. And I think that we should, if we can agree on these, then we should have a nice, clean, laid out version that has all of our potential changes. But I also want to, I don't want to stifle anybody's ideas, just because I came up with one. So I think that we can, Jeff, as far as that one that we just mentioned, how do you, what's your take on that?
My first question about it was maybe just to confirm that in your thought process, you were thinking about buildings as the thing that sets back 150 feet, because there are other, there would be driveways and parking areas and things like that. I think that would be important to clarify if you're speaking about the building itself, the actual structure. That's kind of, and the only other thing I think you would come up against in discussion, bringing it to the full council and in the public hearing is just why 150 feet? What makes that different than 100 feet? Or I think we have most of the setbacks are in the range of 30 to 50.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, any like you said, I think like a most uses, whether it's an automobile, service station, another like well, we already have Burger King and McDonald's, but if there was a restaurant there, other buildings would be subject to either 30 or 50. So just some rational connection to going to 150. If it's
Yeah.
something about the visual impact or the separation, you might just encounter that question. But my question was just about, are you talking about just about the building?
No, I think it's a good question. The way I wrote it was that it was about the building.
Okay.
And the way that I generated that number was using the 100-foot setback from Route 10. And then thinking about a planned business development having to have greenscaping between, so allowing that, an extra 50 feet for all that greenscaping to happen. So, basically similar to the 100 feet from Route 10, but giving a little extra space for all the greenscaping.
Okay.
So that was my rationale, and I'm open, I'm flexible to modifying that if my colleagues feel that that's something that we want to adjust. I was trying to find something that was kind of reasonable, and it could potentially work for in all areas of the zone.
Yeah, and what if some of you would remember what happened when the initial discussion about buffers from schools, came through, it was to map it a little bit. So there would be one level of mapping this like a mapping exercise would potentially be useful moving forward, is just to show, not the entire highway business district is subject to this. It would be where it bounds against a residential district. So, some understanding of what that looks like and how much this covers is just an exercise that we would probably do as it moves forward. But I think on the surface it's fine. I just wanted to make sure it was buildings and just have the thought process that there would be some rationale for the building to move that distance. That's all.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on that? And what do you guys think about the 150 feet? Did my rationale make sense to you, or do you feel like something else would make sense there?
I don't have a problem with the 150 feet, but could you just re-explain to me what the rationale for calculating that is?
Yeah. So as it stands now in the what the planning board put forward, they put 100-foot buffer from Route 10 onto a new planned business development for cannabis.
Right.
So I was thinking that if that is going to bump up against a residential property line, then what we could do is have 100 feet, and then and part of a planned business development has to have greenscaping. So I was thinking that if you put that greenscaping, it just allows extra space for that greenscaping. So the greenscaping has to be like trees that are going to be of a certain height, and I can't remember the exact wording right now, but it has to basically cover the boundary of the buildings. And so I thought that extra 50 feet could, provide for the space for the green spacing and still keep a 100-foot buffer, which is going to be consistent with what they are from the main road.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's as valid of a rationale as any that we're going to get from this.
Okay. How do you feel, Councilor Zaret?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. I mean, ultimately, to go back to what you were saying before, I do think for the sake of time that we've been spending on this, and B, for the sake of the ultimate legal review, we probably do have to come up with some form of consensus, because ultimately this is all, I mean, the planning board's recommendations have not, have legal review, and then
Right.
if there's pretty well intended or planned amendments that are going to be put forward, we should probably have those reviewed as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as much as I was saying before that I agree with this plan, I think it's, reasonable, and you have to kind of carve out some reason why this industry kind of is distinct from others. I mean, Councilor Peake did make a good point that if this was, for instance, a large retail or like grocery store, there'd be the potential for a lot of noise and light pollution. And so, I mean, it makes you wonder if this should be something we discuss applying broadly across the entire zone. So, I mean, there's a few things we've discussed if we've had this discussion, we realize, well, maybe if there's overlapping zones, there's some things we have to talk about in general. So I guess the bottom line is I think it sounds reasonable. I think it's considerate. And, if it's something that certainly we feel at least lukewarmly about, maybe we should just put it down to have, because the attorney can review it and say, no, you can't do this. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's not commensurate with, it's not commensurate with existing zoning, or there's nothing that justifies this. So, I mean, I think anything we even are remotely considering, I think we should at least put in for review, maybe.
Sure. And I think that's a great point. And I think that this could potentially be, a first stab at looking at this, and then looking at potentially expanding it to the rest of the uses within the district. If that's something we feel strong, because I agree. I mean, I don't feel that this particular industry needs an extra buffer, but I think in order to be responsive and respectful to the comments that we've gotten, that's something that we should at least consider. Okay.
I'm interested where Jeff is on this right now. Like, or I mean, I know that you'd said a little bit about it. Like, is that something that I know that you would sort of you had said that you were going to sort of take a look at some of this after our last meeting. Like, how does that square with some of the stuff that you were thinking about?
Yeah, I probably did say that, but then I think I didn't have a lot of direction in terms of where the amendments might go, and I have, capacity. It's always a capacity issue, but so I think if there's the direction, the idea of 150 feet, I want to have a little bit of time to look at that. The thing that I really want to do, and I think I want to try to illustrate, is what are the current zoning requirements now for like a bunch of uses, basically, so that we have a clear understanding. Because I'm thumbing through the planned business development section now, because this is the first I've heard of it, so I'm just processing it as well. There's a 35-foot buffer along the side lot abutting any residential district. So it's 35 feet for a residential district. And what I was just trying to do quick is compare it to, so we're in the planned business development, but if you're not a planned business development, what would be your setback requirement if you were, so like, just for example, in discussion, Stop and Shop, when it came through and when it was permitted, it wasn't a planned business development. It was, we have a category for supermarket. So I was trying to figure out, I'm guessing that we were probably pretty similar, that it looks like my guess, and I want to confirm this, but I would say that the supermarket would have a 25-foot setback. So if you're a supermarket, you start at, or like a gas station, and I want to come up with a list of uses, some uses have 25 feet setback. Then in the planned business development, you jump to 35. And then we go to cannabis and you're 150. So just understanding the sort of the gradation of where this falls on the spectrum. I think a little bit of that research will be useful for everybody. Mm-hmm. I would just generally say, I don't think the city attorney is going to give you input on if 150 feet is good. I think he's going to say, he or she, they would say, yes, you can create a setback based on these reasons, and that's probably the extent of the opinion that you guys, yes, you can do this. And then the distance, I don't think the city, I mean, that's my take on it. I don't think the city attorney is going to sort of opine on which distance makes sense. That's kind of what we would want to think through a little bit more carefully.
And frankly, I don't think that there's really a question here about whether we have the authority to set these sorts of buffers, because we have, right? Like, so clearly we can. I mean, obviously we always want to run everything by the city attorney, but like, this is the sort of thing that we've done before. Right?
Yeah, definitely. And the tests, when we were, to go back to the buffers for schools, the thing that I've heard, towns look at and attorneys look at is your setback so big that it's just not even ever going to happen? Are you basically, making it impossible for someone to do something by having such a large setback? I don't think at 150 you're doing that. But if it was a different conversation and you guys were talking about like 1,000 feet,
Right.
that's where the attorney would step in and say, by making this setback so big, you're basically making it so you can't have this use. And that's kind of the no-no. But going between 150 and 100 and, that range, it's really just coming up with something that works and, is responsive to what you're hearing for concerns.
Right. And just to be clear, like, I mean, sorry, Owen had his hand. I just
No, why don't you finish your thought and then I'll have Owen go in.
Okay.
Yeah, you're in a roll, Tom.
Yeah.
For me, I can't speak for my colleagues, but for me, like the real thing here is I just want, like, if we're going to do this, and again, I still have just some lingering like land use concerns here, which are sort of separate from all this, but I want to come out with something that's the best version of this project if we are, or the best version of this zoning if we do want to proceed with it. And so as far as all that goes, I'm not married to any one number, but I do want to say, like, okay, we're going to be putting a sort of a use into this area that does have residential. Some the abutters have some concerns. Like a setback seems reasonable to me. Now, if we look at it and we say actually 150 is more than you would need to mitigate any of the concerns that they have, then I'd be fine with it being less. If they said, actually, it needs to be even more, then I'd be fine with, like, the number. I mean, I think that Councillor Derby, has a solid reasoning for that as a starting point, but like my main thing is not so much like the number as like, are we in principle saying there should be some sort of setback with residential property lines to sort of mitigate any sort of externalities that might present themselves from a project like this.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor
Now I'm forgetting what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, I think above all, we do have to kind of be fair. I know what I was going to say was that one of the residents who commented at one of our last meetings was talking about other cities that have created kind of residential setbacks, and be interested to look at that. I mean, I think ultimately, if this is something we choose to do, we have to have a good justification for why we're doing it. Like, certainly there's sentiment around how one might feel about being next to, one application versus another in the highway business district. But at the end of the day, we have to decide if it's reasonable, obviously, to legislate around that. Again, like I think Councillor Peake echoed this. I mean, there is to some degree a semi-industrial application of cannabis cultivation, but I also agree that if there was a large grocery store in some of these parcels that abut residential areas, they might have deliveries 24 hours a day, lights on 24 hours a day. So it's somewhat a can of worms. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think going down the path, though, trying to be sensitive to residents who have concerns is definitely reasonable, though.
And I would, I think those are good points. And I would say that just to, remember, as far as land use goes, if this was another agricultural application, it would be allowed by right. We're talking about plants being put in dirt and being, given light so they produce chlorophyll. And then having the flowers be picked. If that's not agricultural, then, I don't know what is real. You have to remember, this was a purely political decision by the state to not classify this as agricultural. And so we don't have to play by those rules. And that's why I'm not, I'm not even entertaining that, because if this was another agricultural, application, it would be by right. So, I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. But no, I appreciate that. So how do you guys feel you'd like to proceed here? I'm not married to 150. I think it's reasonable on a 5 acre parcel. And the way that I did write it, And I don't know if it would make sense for me to read it to you so you can hear it. And I did send you guys a copy of it. I don't know if you got it. So I can just read it really quickly so you can hear exactly how it sounds. So a cultivation manufacturing facility must be at least 150 feet from adjacent residentially zoned property lines. It's simple as that, and which just means that it's only the growing, the new building that has been constructed to grow would be applicable to that setback. So if they had other buildings, those wouldn't necessarily have to be 150 feet from the property line. So yeah, Councilor Zaret.
All right, I'm gonna get into the weeds here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so here's the question. So why are we trying to accomplish by doing this? So are we making people feel better about living next to a large cultivation facility? Are we addressing an actual issue about living next to a cultivation facility? It's potentially a little bit of both, right? We just addressed some of the reasons why that could be problematic. So if instead of potentially setting a setback distance, if we put in requirements for what an applicant has to do in order to in order to make it more appropriate for being next to a residential parcel, like, having to reasonably eliminate all light and noise pollution and have some sort of visibility barrier or something like that. Am I cutting out? Can you hear me?
Just a little bit, just cut out a little bit.
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know if that's already in there, but I'm just wondering if there might be another way to accommodate what we're doing. I apologize that I'm totally veering off in a different direction, but I wonder if we could try to figure out what we're accomplishing by setting this setback, if there's other ways to do it, or if that's the way to do it. So just throwing that out there.
So I sat down with this in my thoughts for a while, because philosophically I'm not for setbacks. And so I thought a lot about, like, why would I want to bring this forward? And I just felt like the mitigation of perceived impact was an important feature, and actual impact, because if you have an extra distance, and since it's part of a planned business development, it has to have a certain amount of shrubbery as a buffer, and it has, there's some, Jeff, maybe you can, I don't have the planned business development stuff in front of me. Is there anything about light pollution? I know that I feel like there was something about having street lights or having lighting for their parking or something in there. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of something else, but.
I mean, generally speaking, the lighting requirements require the lights to be, down facing. And then by the time you get to the property line, there's a photometric plan that gets provided, which shows the lights spillage coming down from each fixture has a light, casting down. And the requirement is that there shall be no lights cast over the property line. I mean, that's the very general way to answer that. But, it is conceivable that you could still see the light through trees, but it won't be, it's not a spotlight that faces outward towards someone else's property. So typically there are some lighting standards. I'd have to go through them, and that might be another thing that we'll just look at to understand that there are some requirements for lighting. In terms of one of the things that you might be seeking to accomplish is just to create the visual separation from the building. And I just wanted to ask Councilor Derby, before we got too far.
Sure.
The language that I have in front of me for the proposed amendment talks about a 75-foot setback from Route 10. So right during one of the last meetings with the planning board, there was discussion about the 100 feet, and it was determined that seemed like it was kind of far, because one of the goals for that setback on Route 10, it was so that we didn't get a large building sort of right up on Route 10, and that it would be set back. We talked about 100 feet because there was ways to show that you could fit another building up front, like a retail building could go up front within the first 100 feet. And then at the conclusion of the planning board's recommendation, it got changed to 75.
Okay.
Because their notion was that 100 seemed too much, and at 75 it would create this separation. So it might be one other number, to look at in terms of a separation. If we're unsure about 150 feet, it could be that, or maybe it starts with 75 to match what the setback was off Route 10, and that was to give the visual separation. And if
and-
that's sorry, if it's visual separation, then that might give you another benchmark to look at.
I think that's great. And I must have just got an older version of, now, did you see the version that I sent you with my amendment written in there? Because I just want to make sure that there wasn't anything else that was changed, because that was basically what I used to base that off of. And so when I came up with the 150 number, I was using that as the 100 feet from Route 10 as a benchmark. So that, I mean, and not that I think 100, but I think it might, I'm happy to talk about that number if the other counselors feel that, now knowing that 75 feet from Route 10 is the number. If you guys wanted to put it at 100 feet or my like I said it before, as I was talking about the rationale for it, even though I'm not a fan of buffers, is that it would present a separation between the two districts that was more tangible, and that could potentially mitigate harm that homeowners in that district could feel would be done to them by a development. Now, that being said, if it was another type of a development, they wouldn't have that type of luxury. And so I think that's where we talk about, potentially looking past this into the future. Do we want to apply this into other areas? But I mean, that was my rationale, was, looking at physical separation between the two zones for this new, if we were allowing a new 25,000 square foot facility. Okay, so are you guys still good at 150? I mean, do we want to, now that we know that 75 foot is the number, do we want to adjust that? I'm open. Yeah, Tom.
I know that at sort of the outset of this buffers, Jeff had said that he would want some time to sort of look that over. What I'm saying right now is I'm open to the idea of a buffer for budding residential properties. I don't really have enough of a sense of sort of how space is used like that to really have a strong opinion on the number, but I'd be interested in the planning department's thoughts on that. Like that 150 sounds as good as any other number, but if there's I'd be interested in actual sort of, what do people who know something about the landscape think about this? And I'm not one of those people, unfortunately.
So if we can agree on this, maybe we can ask, say that this is something that we are potentially willing to bring forward, and that, if Jeff could do a little bit of, research on this, and then the next time we meet, we can kind of make our final decision on this, because we'll have a little bit more of an informed approach. How does that sound? Does that sound fair? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Jeff, is that okay with you?
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll map out some of the I'll map out the setbacks for at 150 feet, and I think probably the exercise that I would also want to do is show you a map with 75 feet as the setback, just for to understand what it does.
Sounds perfect
for an exercise. And then with some restraint, if the hardest part about researching what other towns have done is there's so many towns and they're all different regulations, but I think we can try to get a cross sample. I think one of the larger setbacks that was mentioned, and I think we could find another sort of I usually look for the towns who have staff and have are thinking progressively, to see where other municipalities have landed on some of these setbacks, and I could put together some at least beginning research on. I don't want to go too comprehensive because it's endless, but I think we could give a range to show. I'm guessing that there's some municipalities have no special setbacks, all the way to whatever, if it's 500 feet or 1,000 feet. So, to give you guys a representation of what's generally out there for.
That'd be great.
viewers of us.
That'd be great. We would appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to one of the other things that we've already kind of alluded to. And by the way, anytime, Councilor Peake, Councilor Zaret, if you have any that you want to bring forward and discuss, yeah, Councilor Peake.
So this is one that I've been thinking about since the last time we met, and it's something that I just want to discuss with you guys. And I want to get Jeff's opinion on this because this is something we discussed a couple of years ago. So when we were talking about buffers between establishments, or actually when we were talking about the buffers of the school, this was the first time I sort of brought this up, or that we discussed this. But one thing that I thought about is like what we were discussing is whether those were like buffers from buildings or buffers from property lines. And we ultimately decided that buffers from property lines was just the easiest way to do it with, GIS and what have you. I don't feel, this is just me, that method makes any sense when you're talking about 5-acre parcels.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of folks on this call right now whose primary concern with this zoning requirement is that they're in the middle of doing something that could potentially be disrupted by a competitor across the street. And that's a valid thing to be concerned about. But I think that while it's not like, that's not necessarily our, that's not necessarily the sort of stuff that I think a council should always be considering during a zoning conversation, because it's not our job to pick winners and losers. I think it does bring to the forefront a thing, which is like, why would that actually be an issue? Like, I don't like why these buildings would be, presumably, if we're talking about the setbacks that we're talking about, the buildings could themselves be 200 feet apart, right? The buildings themselves, like, it's not like it's not like it would present this view of like, the whole area is just completely stacked with these sorts of establishments any more than having like a McDonald's and a Burger King kind of near one another. And I don't personally think it's a big deal. It would be a big deal to me if there was on Cottage Street 2 or 3 cannabis dispensaries sharing walls with one another. I think that would sort of send kind of a weird message about like what that area is. But I actually, you know what? I don't even know if I have a problem with that, because we do that with bars and it's fine. But I do think that I understand why some people in the community wouldn't feel like that's a great look. But when you're talking about large parcels in the sort of out of downtown, more auto-oriented part of the city, and you're talking about parcels that are already being set back pretty considerably, I don't personally see what the big deal is. If the buffers were from building to building, I don't see what the problem would be. And so I think that right now that's what I'm inclined to suggest, because I feel like that would address most of the concern that we've heard. I think all but 2 of the people who have spoken with some concern about this issue, their concern has been one that primarily comes down to the fact that our buffer would prevent one of these 2 establishments from operating. And so I think that maybe we need to look at whether or not we should be revisiting that. I don't know if we can do that in the course of this amendment or whether that has to be a separate conversation, but I think that if in the highway business district, the way that we've been talking about your sense of space, I don't think it makes sense. I'm sorry, I've been rambling a little bit. That's where I am. I don't think the way we've been conceiving of space makes sense in the highway business district.
Okay, I tend to agree with you completely. Jeff, how do you, what's your take on that? Because I approach the same issue in a little bit of a different way. And I can talk about that in a second, but I'm just curious to hear what you think of Tom's idea.
I think it would represent, you know, an evolution of thinking about it. I think, you know, going back to when the initial zoning was getting set up in 2018, it was really just making sure, A, the city had regulations because the city wanted to be supportive of the industry in general. And so it was important you had regulations. And then I think B, some of these things were safeguards put in place because we weren't really sure how it was going to play out, especially, you know, at that time, it was seemingly very rapid, you know, across the state. So I do think that there is a way to distinguish the highway business district from the downtown business district. So I think as long as the discussion is still kind of based on the district that you're talking about, I think that's going to be important. Because I don't know that, well, I think it's outside of the scope of this amendment anyway to change it for downtown, but I do think downtown, I think Tom articulated a potential, you know, way that it would appear a little bit different downtown than in the highway business, where by and large you are driving to each destination, which, and I think it's the spatial thing that, you know, could be the consideration, is that different. I think the other thing again, I'm hearing, I didn't get a chance, if you sent it, I didn't get a chance to see what you had sent ahead of time. So I'm listening to this for the first time. That, you know, with a cap of 6, we are really, you know, for at least the foreseeable future, because that's not under consideration at the moment, you know, we do have a way to create a box, and we're looking at this box that this will not go on forever. I mean, we will not, without further changes, there's really not that many more opportunities right now for additional establishments on Route 10. So it's gonna, you know, to potentially take out the 200 feet, you'd probably have a pretty modest, you know, I think we see what we're looking at, which is potentially two dispensaries, you know, across the street from each other. And if we're all knowing that going in, then that's something that we can figure out. Because I don't think with the cap of 6, we don't have this endless possibility for this to help to continue unless there's further changes. So.
Right. And so Tom, that was an issue I was hoping to address, and I was trying to be creative about how do we address that within the scope of what we're looking at right now. And so what I came up with was basically, you know, and I can actually read it, and so bear with me here for a second. So what I wrote was a cultivation manufacturing facility in a planned business development shall be exempt to section 10.10.4.5. Is not required to have a 200-foot buffer between another cannabis establishment. So basically, within the planned, you know, a project that goes into a planned business development would be exempt from the 200-foot buffer. So even though there was 2 cannabis establishments in close proximity, that rule would not apply. And because I was just trying to be creative, because I know that had come up. So Jeff, was my trying to be creative completely out in left field, or is that something that might be doable within what we're looking at now?
I think I appreciate the methodology, like you're thinking on it. I could see how it could work. I could see how there's a couple questions. So I would need a little bit more time to think it through.
Okay.
Because the thing I was thinking about is where we were, what we were doing with the use table, and, you know, whether we were in the use table to make any changes. But I need a little bit of time to think about that.
Okay.
But I think, as was already pointed out, under the thought process that we have, is that one of to put it under the planned business development criteria includes retail. So I can understand that's how you are making that connection.
Right.
I don't have enough I need a little bit more time to think about it. I think it maybe goes on the list to think about.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Tom, you know, I'm curious, because this is something you brought up, you know, something I thought of as well. I'm curious what you think about that approach, or if, you know, if that rubs you the wrong way or whatnot.
It doesn't necessarily rub me the wrong way. Just for what it's worth, I still think, like, if it's something that matters to people, I'm still fine with the idea of a buffer. but with just saying that in these sorts of developments, they're sort of planned business developments, that the buffer will be measured from building to building rather than property line to property line. That might be a bit less radical. Not that what you're proposing is radical, but if you wanted to like change as little as possible while still making it so that this sort of conflict isn't present, that I think is really the issue, is just to say that, like, yeah, if you've got these properties that have big parking lots and they have big lawns in some cases and stuff like that, that we're not talking about the same sort of thing, and we're not talking about the same sort of visual impact, and that we should just treat it like such, and just put in. I mean, I really think that could solve half the issues we've heard about here, is just to say,
No, I agree.
piece of these developments, we're measuring this. We're not measuring Route 10. We're measuring building to building.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially if you look over towards like the post office area, and that there's a big, large acre, which I think is a 5-acre parcel, you know, and that one, if something went in, a planned business development went in there, it might be, you know, less than 200 feet from the one that's going to be near the post office. But if it was measured building to building, you know, if it was the FAR building, I mean, that it just makes sense to me, other than because property line in highway business makes zero sense to me.
And
So-
in downtown business, like the footprint of the building and the footprint of the parcel are nearly synonymous in most cases. It's not like, I mean, actually, this one of the things I love about the highway business, I think is so beautiful, is that, like, there's not these huge parking lots associated with a lot of these buildings. There's sort of public parking, and then you find your way to these little manageable, cool parcels. So it really, I don't feel like it makes a major difference. And in like the mills, it's kind of right, again, it's its own sort of thing. But if we're talking about a part of Easthampton, which sort of, as a side note, probably needs to sort of think as like whether, or, you know, I won't even get into that. Just whole things about whether, like, places that we build entirely about around the automobile and how that's going to work out, you know, in the long run. I think that there's some actual pretty real conversations that people need to have. But given the way the space is currently being utilized, I just think that makes, I think that makes sense. And yeah, and Jeff, I appreciate that. Like, how would this even be measured? And there's like there's some real technical questions that and I hate putting more work on you, but I do think that that's just a thing that we should maybe consider.
Okay. Councilor Zaret, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I mean, only that, you know, really looking at it, I mean, I know what the intent was originally, and especially when we talked about downtown business. But when you even look at the original intent about this, is that the reality of having the perfect storm of storefronts available to purchase or rent, and have cannabis establishments in them, and then have them potentially be 200 feet together. I mean, the reality is that we have 6 special permits. And I mean, I don't know if that will expand in the future, but, you know, currently right now we have 3 operating cannabis retailers. I mean, the reality of when we'll actually be at a steady state of like operational and hopefully successful cannabis retail is probably not any time in the near future. I mean, you know, we're talking probably like 2 to 5 years, if I were to guess, just in terms of all the projects we're talking about and stuff. So, you know, the reality with the buffer is that inevitably, you know, especially in the highway business district, I agree that inevitably, you know, you might end up having 2 parcels, you know, that want to develop that are near to each other. And I do agree with Councilor Peake that there are some unique properties of that district that might make it so that, you know, that buffer is kind of moot there. And frankly, maybe moot elsewhere at this point, just in terms of I mean, that with the kind of anticipated distribution of these special permits, it almost doesn't matter anymore. Although I'm not advising going and changing it in other places, but so I think it makes sense.
Thank you. And so, So the reason why I worded it the way I did was because, I don't know if within the purview of what we have now, we can actually adjust that buffer. I feel like it would have to be a separate agenda item that came to us and to the planning board and was unless we found a way to work it into the requirements of the planned business development or of the change in the highway business zoning. It's a little bit of a workaround, but but anyway, I will defer to Jeff on that one, but I do think that's an important issue. So I appreciate you bringing it up, Tom, because I think that's one of the things that we need to figure out as part of this process. And I don't know if you guys are ready to move on to the next one. Okay. So the next one that I thought was important was last time we had a discussion, and this kind of came up at the beginning, about what do we do with a cannabis establishment that has set up under the reusing of a building rules, but then finds that they want to expand. And I know last time we had talked about, well, they should only get 25,000 square feet total. I sat on that for a while and I thought about it, and I felt like, one of the reasons why we put that, at least why it was stated that reusing a building was important was to, find a new life for these buildings potentially. And I thought that this could be potentially an incentive, a continued incentive for a business that wanted to go into an existing building and establish a grow facility, and then have the option to be able to expand in a new state-of-the-art energy efficient building, be able to expand their operation, and having that be an incentive to reusing a parcel that under the current zoning. And so keeping that as something that is, we identify and acknowledge as important, which is the reuse of existing buildings, but then like kind of leveling the playing field, because then if they want to expand, they can build a new state-of-the-art building, and that's not going to limit them. So they would actually, someone who set up under the existing zoning and then was able to take advantage of this new zoning would be able to actually get a density bonus basically by, setting up under the existing zoning. So just wanted to put that out there as a thought. Yeah, Tom.
So I think that in principle, I really like the idea of rewarding people for reusing existing buildings because it's something that we want. My only concern about this kind of goes back to one of the points that Brenda on the planning board has made a few times, which is that particularly when we're talking about cultivation, more than just retail, probably, shifts in this industry in the coming years are likely to wipe out a lot of the cultivators in Massachusetts. I'm saying that sort of callously, but I think it's just something that we need to consider, because we are a community that has spent, as our planner can attest to, a tremendous amount of time and money trying to reuse large buildings that were built for one purpose and then walked away from. Right, that's sort of like the generational challenge of our city, has been figuring out what to do with these huge things that people built to do this one thing with, and then when that thing didn't really work out anymore, we were okay. So what do we do with these things? And so, in a way, like the idea of saying like, oh well, if part of it is reusing an existing building, then we'll let you build something even bigger. I don't, that maybe that's not a generous way of saying saying what you're proposing. In which case, I'll happily walk it back. But I think if that's sort of the idea, then my concern is like, we don't know which places will succeed and which won't. This is an emerging industry, and some places will really thrive and some won't. And like, there's a concern that I do continue to have about just like how much we want to build out these things, and that like there's a reasonable chance we're going to be trying to figure out something else to do with them, and in some cases offering some rich guy a bunch of tax breaks to redevelop them, when at some point, a generation from now. That's my, sorry if that's not super coherent. That's sort of where my main concern is about these things, is like how much of this sort of use do we want to see built out into large buildings?
I mean, I think that's a fair concern. I think, but I do think that if we don't have some sort of provision, for expansion, that we're going to be hamstringing these businesses potentially, and then making them more vulnerable to the conditions that you're talking about. And I would concede that you understand economics a lot better than I do, but I also would say that within our resilient community, we are probably able to find multiple pathways to reuse spaces. For example, I mean, we could even write into the zoning. So here I go. Why don't we dictate if the building becomes vacant for any reason, it becomes a public roller skating rink, indoor paintball park, and open to the public as an indoor recreation facility where you can socially distance because it's 25,000 square feet. I mean, there are things that we can reasonably do with these things. I think in worst case scenario, it's not like a Walmart, where, because these buildings are big open canvases. So I can't really justify saying, oh, this is going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repurpose, because it's a blank canvas. When you take everything out of it, it's just a big open building. So, I mean, maybe I'm too Pollyanna about that, but Owen, why don't you put me in my place?
Well, I mean, I see it Tom's way, but this also goes back to, and I mean, I guess a lot of the things I keep saying are contingent on the fact that our cap on special permits doesn't change forever or for a long time. I think I do agree with Tom. I mean, frankly, it's my concern about this whole discussion in general, not to go back there, but, is it in our interest to build these, to encourage the building of new large buildings in a potentially unknown industry? And I guess the only thing I'll say is, I guess it's the nature of the industry to have large buildings associated with it. I'd say I'd say so starting from there, if our plan is to say we're okay with allowing new construction of up to 25,000 square feet of cultivation, then I think it's really only fair to give other people in the industry the same opportunities. And so, but I think that the amount of cultivation space that any given entity should be 25,000 square feet. So, mind you, this cap is on cultivation. We didn't put any caps on the size of retail space or, research and development or anything like that. So, if I think you may have to have some sort of kind of clause in there that you can certainly expand, but your total cultivation space, footprint has to be X amount in order, again, to have kind of reciprocal fairness. So again, I'm not against what you're saying, because again, I think it offers people kind of equity in regards to what we're talking about allowing elsewhere. I don't disagree though with what Councilor Peake's saying, that we have to kind of flash forward and see what does that mean if this industry kind of consolidates a little bit at some point and shrinks, and there's potentially empty cultivation spaces, and what will happen to them. So, and you had a few ideas there, so that's
roller skating party.
Yeah.
Jeff.
So I'm just listening to this, and in the discussions from the past couple of months, we were not, I think, and it wasn't always this way. I think if you look at the existing zoning right now that we currently have, which allows the cultivation in existing buildings, and I think if you look at it carefully, under the existing zoning, I don't think there's really a clear path to expand from an existing building. So because again, it all goes down to the character of Route 10. That was one of the reasons why all this got reverted back to existing buildings. There was this discussion, what about new building cultivation? And we ran out of time and the thought process was not complete. So it kind of reverted back to, okay, we'll allow it in existing buildings because then we know it's not going to really disrupt the character of Route 10. And I know that one of the planning board members was really applauding that thought process, at least. Well, she's still applauding that thought process, but at least then it gave us a safeguard to say that you could cultivate in an existing building, but I don't see how with the current zoning that you would be able to expand. So it's really important when applicable was at these couple of hearings, it was brought to the attention, like, well, what if you have an existing building you want to expand? So I think there was a real openness to that discussion. But I think I just would say that I think we have to keep it at a 25,000 square foot cap as well, if that's where we are right now, because it was about, and we went down to 25,000 square foot for the cap for new buildings because, again, of the character. And we want to make sure that we're still not subject to a very large building coming in and really just disrupting the character. So I think going up to 25,000 square foot as an expansion makes some sense. I would say that it should comply with the same setback from Route 10 that is chosen as we go forward. And same thing with residential districts, although I'm not sure it's gonna apply. I don't know if this is, something that applicable is interested in. But I think if we are in this thought process, we would want to look at Cook Building Supply as well. So they have that barn is about, I think we measured it, I think it's about 12,000 square foot, the barn. So, if we look at that building in particular, and if they wanted to expand, I don't think we would want to go over 25,000 square foot for that building expansion without kind of changing what's going on in that property. The only other thing is, just making sure that we understand like what kind of like, I think the way you described it, Owen, Salem, was like, if an existing establishment is set up, under the existing zoning and then they want to expand, I just want to make sure that, we don't run into a scenario where an existing building gets demolished and isn't, so like, it gets built out as cultivation and that cultivation is doing really well and we want to add to the building and expand that, then that makes some sense. But if they're not set up and then the building just gets proposed for demolition and then there's a new building at 25K, at least it's within that cap. But I think there's a couple questions there for me, how it would work. All right, that was long-winded.
No. I mean, that makes sense. And I guess the way I was looking at it might have been a little too naive, but I was trying to find a way to reward a business that was going in under the existing rules, which, I think at least at the planning board level, I know that this hasn't even really happened as far as anybody reusing a space to grow. But I like the idea of it, I think that model is a good model. And so I was just trying to find ways to incentivize someone using that model and then being able to have room to grow. Looks like Councilor Peake.
Just throwing some ideas around here. Would you say it's already an incentive that they don't have to do any of this planned business development stuff that a new building would do, and that they don't have the acreage limit that a new building would have? I mean, and I know that like I'm very open to the idea, not just with cannabis, really with anywhere, of saying, of using buildings. I think that somebody once, I said somewhere, like the greenest building you could ever build is the one that already exists.
Yeah.
Building something new and all that concrete and steel and what have you. So there's things I like about that, but isn't that already like, I mean, there's these new buildings, should we allow them, are certainly subject to parcel size requirements and sort of vegetation requirements and setback requirements. that someone using an existing building is not subject to. I don't know if that's enough of an incentive, but it's a start, right?
No, I think it is. But I think if I heard Jeff correctly, I think that, we might have to tweak some language if we, wanted to, because it sounded like there isn't a path as zoning is currently written for someone who goes into an existing building to expand necessarily. And so if we wanted to enable that, and even if it wasn't my proposal, which was an extra 25,000, and it was just to create a 25,000 total, it sounds like there is some wording that would need to happen, right? Is that, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff?
Yeah, and I thought I definitely heard you in one of the last meetings say that was something that we were going to look at through this process. I think I'm very open to the idea. Like when it got brought up, it's important to make sure that there is that expansion capability. I just think going beyond the 25,000 square foot cap that we're talking about kind of really extensively for new buildings, I don't know if we have to talk about how much that's important, as an incentive or not. I just think it kind of flies in the face of everything that we've just spent many months kind of putting in place for a new building. And the addition is, it will constitute a new building. I mean, at 25,000 square feet, that will be, it's substantial. So it'll look just like a brand new building. And if it's then able to continue to grow in size beyond that, I just think we just need to calibrate it. And it's just maybe a thinking exercise to figure out if it makes sense or not.
Okay, thank you. Councilor
Zaret. I think I'm with Jeff, and I actually think it just reiterates what I said before, that I just think extending the opportunity to have everyone in the zone have the same amount of access or potentially access to cultivation space. I think that would be what I would think would be, a good intention. That's all.
Okay, that's fair. I think, Jeff, this is something that we're probably going to need a little guidance on as far as language goes. So I don't know if your ability to kind of help us craft that, but I do think that this is an important piece of the whole equation. And I've retreated from my previous position after hearing all these arguments. So I'm fine to consider this 25,000 cap total. But I don't know if you guys would mind, but I wouldn't mind getting Cott's thought on this. Do you mind if I open it up and just to hear what someone who this could potentially affect, what his thoughts are? Cott, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I actually do. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I know that there's a cap that you guys are working on, and now when you want to really think about this, right? I know that we're not subject to a planned business development, but we are repurposing a used building. Now, I know you guys are going to look at it at the overall picture, but remember, in reality, the highway business is actually capped at 50,000. But because we're trying to fit this one parcel in, and we have to look at it as a whole, we're bringing down the cap size to 25,000. So that pretty much would affect us if we wanted to expand for the building. I mean, it's a gray area, right? You said that there's no road for expansion, Jeff. I mean, it's not written that way in the zoning bylaws, from what I understand. It just says a repurpose of an existing building. It doesn't say we couldn't add an addition, correct?
I think it needs to be looked at. I mean, the premise that we've operated on is that you could do cultivation in an existing building, and that has some definition, which is within an existing building. And I think we're very open to making sure the expansion capability is there. I think we have to have some additional discussions, because from sitting through many hours of these discussions, what I think is that the 50,000 square foot cap is too big, and I think that was kind of a consensus. We've had a lot of discussions about, we are talking about cannabis because it's relevant right now and we should be talking about it, but many things have come up in terms of the whole highway business, and I would argue that if we finish this process, and if there's interest in talking about the whole highway business district, I think we're going to find pretty quick that 50,000 square foot is pretty big, and I don't think it would. I think that I heard, you know, numerous people say that we shouldn't, that's too big. So I don't want to push too hard on it, Kai. I just think that we just need to talk about, you know, you are repurposing a building, but what does that give you for expansion, you know, capability? Does it just eliminate any requirement or not? And I don't know. So I'm learning of some of this tonight just for the first time. So
Yeah,
like I said, it's an exercise to think it through.
and Kai, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yes.
So what, you know, what is your current plan for cultivation space? Like, what's the square footage?
The square footage is only 8,000.
Okay, so if you did,
Manufacturing as well.
okay,
We got to leave room for packaging, for inventory. There's a lot involved. I mean, and the footprint of the building is only 10 feet in height in one section. So we don't have the ability to already go to 30 feet. That's already done. So having an ability to go to 30 feet will give you more space above, from what I understand. So any facility that has that height would be able to expand upwards inside and double stack their tiers or go in different routes because they can double stack lights. We don't have that ability because we're using a repurposed building. And even if we wanted to expand on that property, it doesn't give us much for expansion either, because we can't really go up. We would have to buy the adjacent property or lease the adjacent property to even expand outwards. And remember, you already spoke about not limiting us to go off in the front. So we have to go off in the back, which we're already abutting another parcel, which is Cernak Field. So we can only go off to the left. I mean, if you're looking at the building, it would be on the west side of the building, which is where Captain Jack's is now, if that would be a future expansion for us. And that would add more to the parcel, but it obviously, I don't know what would be subject to. But this is one thing you got to think about, is that if you're going to allow an planned business development and then just say, hey, you know what, let's remove that buffer and let's just insert the retail for them. Let's just put that all in there for them. Just think about how this is being placed in place. I mean, months ago, Jeff, I went to you and asked for a zoning amendment for a medical license. Nothing.
well, so I'm just gonna hold it there. So
Okay,
I want to keep this relevant to and germane to the discussion that we're having now. So,
Okay.
and I, you know, honestly, I was just curious about like what your projected growth space was going to be and how much you would have the potential to expand. That was my, you know,
I mean, it's going to be tough with the way the building sets. So we'd have to go on a different parcel, no matter. And if we tear off the top, obviously it's going to cost us more money in the near future. It's not like we're building from scratch. If you build from scratch, it's going to cost you way less. So economically, it's a great move by across the street. I applaud them for that. I mean, they're not repurposing a building. I mean, I think it costs more to repurpose a building because you have to deal with environmental issues that you could possibly run into. There's a lot of things because you don't know where you're opening up until you open up these walls or these floors. There's a lot involved.
all right. I mean, that's good. That's good for us to think about, I think as well. So Councilor Zaret, did you have your hand up?
No, I mean, I just wanted to, unless I'm misunderstanding what Mr. Cosm's saying, that again, the only limit, at least from my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is on cultivation space, that we didn't really set a definitive limit on other building uses other than what already exists for the 50,000 cap for retail. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And you know, so I think if there was other, you know, packaging things or whatever happening in the building, like I don't, the cap wouldn't apply to that. It would be for cultivation.
Right. So like, it's not like if you have, let's say 10,000 square feet, you can only expand out 15. You could put on an entire 25 if you said that's your dedicated cultivation space and keep that 10 for other uses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that's an accurate statement. Okay. So, I mean, those were really the biggest three issues for me. was the residential buffer was the 200-foot business-to-business buffer, and then this piece about how does an existing business go about expanding? How much can they expand? So those are the three issues that I kind of identified after our many discussions on this. Counselors, do you have any other things that you would like to add into that mix as we kind of move forward on this?
I mean, the only thing I had talked about was the energy issues, and that's kind of now, been submitted elsewhere. So I think we could probably have that discussion within that agenda item, if that sounds reasonable.
I think it does. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so is it fair to say that we can put a pin in this discussion for tonight? On Wednesday, I'll continue the public hearing again so we can get a little bit of clarification around these three issues that we want to address. And then potentially have those be reviewed if they need further review to the city attorney. And it looks like Jeff wants to say something, so I'll let him. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks. I mean, I think my only, I could think request would be for Wednesday, if there's a way to present kind of a little bit more of the process thus far. So, just going through a couple of the reviewing that there were joint hearings, and then there was a planning board report. And I think it would be important to put potentially on the screen, put up the recommended language so that everyone kind of can start there. And then I think what you just described as summary is kind of talking about these three additional potential changes: the residential buffer, the separation between dispensaries, and creating expansion capabilities for existing buildings, and then soliciting public comment just to make sure that we capture that.
I think that's important.
To see if there's anything else kind of like of substance that comes up before we send it off. Because I think with the list, it might take, we might need a couple weeks probably to come up with the revised language. And I just want to make sure that if we capture other public comment to decide whether to incorporate those other elements. I think that was
that sounds like a really salient idea. I'm happy to do that. So, Councilor Zaret.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd be very strongly in favor of that. I think at we missed that opportunity, I think, for a variety of reasons at the last meeting. Although I think it's fair to say the last meeting was kind of just a general introduction with the knowledge that we were going to be continuing it and just to kind of recruit more public input. But I think it would be great for the planner to present as much as he had so far. There's some of those great illustrations you had, Mr. Bagg, where you have some of the parcels in the highway business districts. You're really able to illustrate the impact of some of these setbacks and what's potentially available under what we're proposing. And I mean, I think you've done a great job so far in terms of really being on top of keeping a running summary of what's happened and where we are. So I think for me, it would be really valuable, Mr. Chairman, if he was able to present some of that at the meeting.
I think that would be great. And I'm happy to help with that, Jeff, as well. So it doesn't have to all be on your shoulders. I'm happy to share that burden.
I think that'd be great. If we could just give the preview, the presentation of the overview, I think that would be really helpful. And then, kind of capturing where there's additional thoughts or discussion.
Yeah, I think, and that give the public an opportunity to speak to it as well, I think is important, just to capture that. So I appreciate everybody's time on that. We do have another item on our agenda that I would love to get to if the other councilors wouldn't mind. And I don't know if you noticed, I feel like not all of our agenda items are on this agenda, but I will say that on this agenda, we do have the new zoning amendment for the change in hours to cannabis, to all cannabis facilities. And so basically, this is a proposal to create an hour structure that is more in line with surrounding communities. It was requested that we look at changing the opening hours from 10 a.m. to 8 a.m. And because apparently the dispensaries in Northampton are opening at 8. And so in order to have competitive equal footing, there's a request that we look at these hours. Jeff, do you have anything to mention on this?
I don't, there was the discussion about it, which is, the special permits that have been granted so far all kind of had the condition that they have these operating hours, and it's lodged in the zoning ordinance. So, that was the discussion, is that to open earlier, it does require the process to amend the zoning to go from 10 to 8 a.m. But it seems, I think the reasons behind it and the justification seem to make sense. So I don't have any other sort of comments on the amendment itself. It did require the actual process to go through the whole amendment to do this.
Right, and thank you. And I think, one other thing to consider about this is because it's a zoning change, I sent this to the planning board as well. So we are going to have to set up a joint public hearing with the planning board where we'll discuss this further. As far as I'm concerned, I was able to get in touch with a couple of the dispensaries and just asked, how, like, if they were having any problems, and it seems like the morning is, a very mild time for the dispensaries, no incidents, and that probably going to 8 o'clock would not increase any sort of negative incidents happening. So that was just something that I thought was interesting as we move forward in this process. I'm happy to open it up for discussion, but we are going to meet with the planning board on this one as well. Yeah, Councilor Zaret.
I believe Councilor Peake said before I raised my hand. So.
No, it's fine.
Why don't you go first, and then we'll get to Councilor Peake.
Yeah, I guess my only, so in all the current, in the 2 open applications we have now, so that's my only real reference point. So we have herb is the verb, or verb is the herb. I can never remember which one it is, but the one on Cottage Street, I'll just say that. And then, we have one in the Mills, and they both kind of have, there is some residential kind of overlay there. And so my only question would be, would opening at 8 be disruptive in any way to the residential community? Or would they have any concerns? I would just want to hear those. I'm not saying that. And also, I guess, what other businesses, and if that's a concern, then what other businesses in the area might be open to, and does that make it kind of a non-point? But I agree with, being pro-business and strengthening the businesses here in Easthampton. So if there's an opportunity to create a level playing field and ongoing competition, to support our businesses, I'm all for it, as long as, there's not some unforeseen issue. But, on the face value of it, I don't have any concerns other than just making sure that, there's buy-in.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah. Councilor Peake.
Right. I don't see, at the end of the day, I walk down Cottage Street a lot. I don't see, those businesses operating in a substantially different way than other, businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any deep concern about this. I am going to have to contemplate whether or not this is one that I should recuse myself for, as it would potentially affect the operating the business hours of somebody, of a member of my household. So it might be one that I ultimately end up. I'll think about it. I've already declared this as a thing, and filed it. So I need to think a little bit about my own involvement in this one. But
Can I give you a small piece of advice?
Sure.
The state ethics hotline, the phone call, you talk directly to a lawyer, and she's awesome. She'll.
Yeah. So we did this as soon as she got that job, and I filed the form with the city and everything. So it's all there. I'm just giving you a heads up that there's a potential that on this one I might need to take a little step back. So I'll contemplate that.
Okay.
But for what it's worth, like that's in terms of how I vote, but just in terms of how I'm feeling on this, like I've yet to see any substantial reason why this would cause any sort of public harm. So I have no objection to it moving forward.
Great. Okay, thank you, and that's kind of just really what I wanted to hear today, before we set the joint public hearing with the planning board, just so we kind of have, at least we've discussed it a little bit before we head into that meeting. So that was my goal.
Great.
And yeah, so oh, sorry, Jeff.
Not about this, but understanding that I have a question about something that's not on the agenda, and maybe it should have been during public speak time, but it's cannabis related. I wanted to ask about your preferred process to get something on the agenda. So my understanding is that there is a discussion at the state level for delivery. So it's two categories of wholesale delivery, and there's another category which I can't remember the name of for a smaller version of delivery. And we've been approached with questions about what would we want to do as the city with delivery, and I think most of these discussions start here, and then understand what's happening at the state and whether there's appetite or interest in potentially creating the zoning to then allow it. So I think that there's a party or two who would have interest in talking about this and understanding. I think there's an element of education on this side, which is what is happening at the state and what are the parameters that the state's talking about, and then how does Easthampton think they might want to approach it? Do we want to start a discussion about a zoning amendment? So I see Councilor Zaret too, but is it something that gets a request to you?
So, and I would say, just as far as process, if you can send me a memo, then I think then we can bring it forward to the city council and the planning board at the same time, and so send it back to ordinance and to the planning board. I think that's a acceptable process.
Okay, and then I think maybe Councilor Zaret I think there's another question of like if someone approaches a councilor with the question, and then Owen, were you going to speak to that at all, or were you going to speak to something different?
Yeah, I mean, without getting too much into an item that's not on the agenda, I'm aware of this interest, and I'll circle back with you in the next few days.
Okay, so it sounds like a memo though is one of the things that we could do to get it on. Does the agenda have? My question is about process, really. So
Right.
If there's a memo that goes to you as a councilor, do you have to bring it to the full city council first to put it on your agenda? Is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Tom, did you want to add something?
Yeah.
Yeah, just that as of this year, we sort of expanded on a rule that we wrote 2 or 3 years ago to sort of help with sort of transparency things, to just sort of ask that when we're having these things, that there be at least some initial like first offer language submitted. So, this came up because of some controversial things in the past where, you'd say like, here is a proposed amendment that would allow delivery rather than we should talk about delivery, so that there's at least something for people for members of the public who might be interested in this to take a look at and see what they agree with or not. And just so that's just how we've got it set up now. And that would just be the one thing is that could come from the city, or that could come from an individual councilor. But when that enters the agenda, the preference of, as we voted on it this time, is for there to be a actually like fully fleshed out initial proposal for us to start debating.
Okay, and that's how we started this whole conversation back in March or April. So, okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to confirm. That's helpful. Okay.
Cool. My thumbs up doesn't quite look normal in this. All right. Okay. So anything else, councilors? Or if not, I'm happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion and a second, and I will start with Councilor Peake.
Aye.
Councilor Zaret.
Sorry, I was on my notes page. Aye.
Okay, and I vote aye as well. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And we will be, again, at the City Council meeting on Wednesday, we will be discussing the Highway Business Amendment and kind of going through what we've done so far. And there will be opportunity for people to speak there as well. So that's 6:15 at the City Council Zoom. All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Right.